What's up out there? I am a longtime Diablo fan, so when Diablo 4 was announced, I was interested to say the least. But after watching a lot of reviews after it came out, I decided to just hold off. The seasonal content doesn't interest me, so boiling it down to just the campaign puts it in the $40 range for me. At the $70 price point, it's just far beyond what I'm willing to pay at this time. Besides that, the expansions are probably going to be in the $50 range, so may as well wait for the complete edition or for the Microsoft purchase to go through and get it on Game Pass. That said, after watching all the coverage, I was in the mood for an ARPG, and Path of Exile seemed like the most logical choice. I had tried this for about a half hour a few years ago, but had just finished Wolcen at the time, so wasn't ready for it. Now, first point of order. This video is not about bashing Diablo 4. It's not about a dick measuring contest between Path of Exile and Diablo 4 in any way, shape, or form. We will compare them, but only to show why I'm playing PoE, and I think others who have been let down by Diablo 4 might see where PoE scratches that itch. This video is to explain my expectations from an ARPG and whether Path of Exile delivers. Those expectations were built by Diablo 1 and 2, so it's only fair to use those as a yardstick to how D4 and PoE stack up. Second item to get out of the way. I've always considered an ARPG to be a Diablo-like game. I realize it is short for action RPG and could be used to describe anything from Skyrim to Demon's Souls to Cyberpunk 2077, but in my mind, ARPG means Diablo-style game since that's where it pretty much came from. That defines the isometric style, gear progression, character attributes, and other factors more clearly. So if I say ARPG in this video, I mean Diablo-style game specifically. We've had many examples of ARPGs over the years, and what I've personally played includes Diablo 1, 2, and 3, Grim Dawn, Wolcen, Titan Quest, Last Epoch, Malice, Sanctum Breach, and a few others that I've spent much less time with. To dive right in, Diablo 1 and 2 are some of my all-time favorite games. So what I look for in an ARPG is a game that takes me back to that style or somehow innovates on that formula. Diablo 1 created a whole new genre, so right off the bat it's made a name for itself, but the game is pretty awesome. The NPCs, atmosphere, music, gameplay, and gear are all pretty memorable. NPCs that easily come to mind are Griswold, Cain, Adrian, Wirt. The gloomy atmosphere was created by the music in concert with the level design. You have the church-type levels, the caves, and then on to hell itself. Things like bloody corpses and decaying furniture littered the levels. Music had a seriously ominous overtone. Some of what you hear sounds like shrill violin noises, which are low-key. Other music has a bass drum, boom, ba-boom, boom, boom. All these years later, I can still easily call that music to mind. It left a mark. The creature audio was also memorable, like the fallen death vomit, the goatman's gargling death sounds, and the azure drake's hiss in hell. The creature design was memorable, and while there were some variants, you never really got tired of the same creatures because every few levels saw a new batch of enemies to slaughter. Gear was distinct and impactful, like I remember items of the whale being pretty highly sought after. Story was not terribly complex, which you could easily follow along while playing. The game wasn't slowed down when you were fed story components, and even then you could just ignore the story and kill demons if you wanted. Diablo 2 took everything Diablo 1 did and amplified it. Gear and skills were improved, more classes to play as, and the levels were expanded to span across acts with hub levels. The music, enemy design, level design, and atmosphere were also taken to new highs. We saw the entry of sockets, charms, and the secret cow level was actually brought from meme to life. Diablo 3 was okay. I played it once on console and beat the campaign, but it felt like a watered-down Diablo, so I never really went back. They expanded the story considerably, but reduced everything else down like attributes and skills. You had less in the toolbox on how your character was built. So in my mind, Diablo 1 and 2 are the blueprint for an ARPG to follow. From what I can tell, Diablo 4 follows more of the Diablo 3 path than 1 or 2, although they moved back to darker imagery. Moving to an open world could be interesting if done correctly, but from what I have seen, Diablo 4 just has a lot of things to skip while you're trying to get to the dungeon. Another meaningful ARPG to mention at this point is Grim Dawn. I got this cheap on a Steam sale with all its expansions, and in my opinion is what Diablo 3 should have been. It ramps up the formula quite a bit with skill tree and gear complexity. I played through the base game and all the expansions and can highly recommend it for those looking for a good ARPG. So now that I've laid the groundwork, let's take a look at Path of Exile. In short, it's an excellent game that further ramps up the ARPG formula even more, and similar to how I view Grim Dawn to be a more appropriate version of Diablo 3, I think Path of Exile is far more in line with how I feel Diablo 4 should be. You have meaningful gear and class choices for one. I've been using my own build so far, and it's definitely been a learning experience. I pretty much hit a brick wall in Chapter 9 that I had to solve by getting my resistances sorted out. I still died a lot after that, but it was nearly impossible to stay alive against a particular boss for longer than a few seconds at one point. Beyond that, the atmosphere is phenomenal. The music really takes me back to Diablo 1. There are certain tracks that have that eerie violin kind of sound. The atmosphere and level design harken to Diablo 2. You have jungle areas, city areas, sewers, beaches, and so on. And there's a level with tortured people screaming in the background, and another one with bubbling blood that was pretty impressive. So even though PoE draws a lot from the first couple Diablo games, it does a lot to set itself apart audibly and visually. There were many times during the campaign that I just stopped and appreciated the music and level design. Not every level was great. Some of the jungle levels were okay, but nothing special. Then you get into a burning city with crowd noise in the background and broken bodies littered around a fountain full of blood, and it really hits hard. So there is a nice contrast between what I would say is a more mundane level and one that is supposed to invoke a reaction. PoE largely follows what I would call your typical Diablo-style progression. You get a basic weapon and go fight stuff. New mechanics show up periodically, so you have more to learn the deeper you go, but I didn't feel any of it was overwhelming. That is not to say that everything is explained in the game. I've been watching various videos about some of the mechanics, and sometimes it's hard to see how that applies to me. It's almost like some of these creators are speaking a whole other language, but they are deep into the endgame, which is far from where I am. I think most of the League mechanics from over the years have been implemented into the game, which also makes it deeper, but more confusing at the same time. There is a story and what seems to be a deep lore, although I quit following it once they stopped narrating it. I felt that having to stop and read the text mid-level was a total drag and flow, so I started skipping it all. I've even quit listening to NPCs in town. It just got to be too much downtime. PoE does a lot of unique things, too. Gold doesn't exist. Stuff like Town Portal and Identify Scrolls are currency, so upgrade items are the currency. NPCs sell stuff, but to trade with other players, you have to jump through some hoops. You get so many gear drops that it requires a loot filter to sort out, and at first I was collecting everything for currency, but quit after a while since there was just so much. Eventually I grabbed a simple loot filter which highlights the good stuff and ignores the crap. Skills are obtained from jewels and have support jewels that enhance those skills. Each can be swapped out at any time, and all jewels level up when equipped and used. Flasks are not just for health or mana either. These can have their own affixes and even be uniques. It's another deep system to weigh options with. Some flasks offer movement, while others offer resistances or healing buffs. The remarkable thing is that PoE is a completely free game. No content is locked out. There are no time or level caps. It's just there to install and play. I've seen several recommendations to at least complete the campaign before investing into the game at all. So you could complete the entire game without spending a dime. There is a cash shop, but no pay to win there. Everything is mostly all cosmetics. There are stash tabs, however you feel about that. You start with 5 on the free side, but can buy new stash tabs for a few dollars each. The basic tabs probably fill up pretty quickly, so buying more is incentivized. You're also not able to trade with other players using the basic tabs. At the least, you would want to upgrade the basic tabs to trade and have more space, but there are specific tabs for various items, further organizing everything should you invest in them. We have an expansion coming in the form of PoE 2, which is going to simply be added on to what is already there. From what I understand, all of your purchases transfer over since it's all in the same launcher. League content comes out every few months. You can play a standard character that lives perpetually or start a fresh character with each new league. League characters do roll back into the standard group once the league is done, and they incorporate league mechanics into standard as well. But it's a free game, so it must suck, right? So far, I've put in a little over 40 hours and have just completed the campaign. I know I've gone slow while trying to finish quests and explore, but there's quite a lot to do, and I'm always excited to jump back in for more. The story seems good, I guess. It's convoluted, and as mentioned earlier, once they stopped narrating things, I quit following it. I found it hard to stop the fun in order to read some long scroll. Maybe on another playthrough, it'd be more beneficial to focus on story and lore. That said, if you're into lore, it's quite deep. Kitten Cat Noodle has a good lore series of videos on YouTube. I've been trying to follow along, but there's so much there. She'll rattle off a name I recognize and an event I took part in, but there's just too much to digest. Lore is spilled all over item descriptions, scrolls, and dialogue, so there is an incredible amount to take in. The audio is as good as Diablo 1 or 2. A lot of the ambient level sounds take me right back to those games. PoE has its own flavor, like this one level filled with tortured screams in the background. The whole level just felt off to be in. Combat is extremely fluid, no complaints here. The systems are simple enough, but with a lot of user agency to feel like kind of limitless. Socketing a new gem yields a new skill to try. Link sockets mean new combinations of support gems that can affect the skill gem. Boss battles can be next level with phase transitions that are very fluid. I think it was the end of either chapter 3 or 4 that had you fighting several phases. There wasn't a dialogue pause or exposition blast. You kill one boss and move to the next. Better not let your guard down either because they don't follow a formula. Some boss fights only have one phase while others stack. Death is swift too. It can be frustrating to just melt under a massive poison ball or explode randomly. Low resistances are definitely painful. After just over 40 hours, my only complaints so far are that the camera is in pretty tight and feels claustrophobic in some ways, and that mobs and spell effects all blend together. I've had several battles where my minions were killing something that I couldn't see in the pile of bodies. One technical issue I did run into was with stuttering, which was fixed by changing to predictive, I think it was, in the setting for network performance. I guess the only other thing I'd like to see changed is to add some kind of in-game trading hub like the Grand Exchange in RuneScape. To trade currently, you have to buy a certain stash tab, make it open to others, put prices on items, wait for an in-game invite to trade, join someone's hideout, and then do the deal. I've not bothered with any of that and may not have it exactly correct, but it all sounds cumbersome. An in-game trading hub would go a long way in my opinion. Which brings us around to the build that I'm using. It's not great, I know that, but it's fun to play around with. Typically I stick to melee in most of these kind of games, but I decided to change things up, so my first build is a witch using fire and minions. I find that some minions have a set time limit where others last until they die, so I stick to the ones that last for a while. I've been using a corpse explosion skill and a fireball skill for range. Fire the ranged attack up while the minions go kill stuff and then use corpse explosion to send fiery death out from there. The biggest issue I run into is with boss fights. You typically can't get the minions I'm using back because they rely on corpses to draw from, and it's you against the boss. There really isn't anything to res. The build wasn't too bad until the end of chapter 4. Then the weaknesses really showed up, but it was doable. As I've gone further, I've tweaked skills and gear, had an insane skill check at the end of Act 9, and had to really redo resistances because I got stuck insta-dying to one boss. A few tweaks and that fight became doable. Was still tough, but I got through it with only a few minutes spent adjusting gear to get the right stats. I would add that drops tend to suck, but I think you're supposed to engage in the crafting system, which I've largely ignored. So now that I've beaten the campaign, I have in-game open up, which I've tried for a moment. I also dove into the current league just to see how the seasonal content feels. For this, I'm trying a bow build. I can say that while Diablo 4 style of season was unappealing, I will be in the next PoE league from the start. Going through the story over and over isn't all that appealing, which I know you can skip it in D4, but since I enjoyed the levels so much in PoE, I'm not really bothered by it. I'm genuinely curious to see how a new build goes against all the problems I had the first time around, which is why I've opted for that in the current league rather than spending much time at in-game on my standard character. What also helps is that my stash tab purchase counts for standard as well as league content and is shared amongst characters in the same mode. So while all the stuff I found in standard can't be used in league, I am able to hold items for another build should I choose multiple characters. Completing the campaign is necessary to unlock PoE 2 whenever that releases, so I started on standard just to get that knocked out and learn the basics. So after 40 hours, I've made it through the tutorial. And to bring this around full circle before we close out, Diablo 1 came out in 1996, which is 27 years ago. Diablo 2 was 4 years later in 2000, and Diablo 3 came out in 2012. Blizzard has had 27 years and 3 prior titles to build upon. They have also had many other contemporaries like Grim Dawn or Path of Exile to draw inspiration from, but from what I can tell, Diablo 4 is not all that different from Diablo 3. Now, I'm not saying Diablo 4 is a bad game, but when a company wants to charge $70 for the base game and then toss on battle passes and paid expansions, it becomes more difficult to part with my dollars, especially when you consider that PoE is completely free, has a major expansion just around the corner, which is also free, runs regular leagues, which are also free, has an insanely deep customization system, and a massive amount of content, all with the choose your own investment level. I played like 30 hours before ever committing $1 to the game, but could have certainly just played the campaign to completion and moved on without a dime out of pocket. To date, I've spent $60 on stash tabs, so even though I've spent money, I've spent less than D4 costs. There are a few more stash tabs I want to get that will round out the collection, so even at around $80, which is more or less the cost of D4, I get a large number of stash tabs, a full game with an impending expansion, deep in-game content, and regular league content. D4 players are struggling with what, 4 stash tabs? Simple quality of life things like that are why Blizzard is well behind the curve and are just too big to adjust. Now, I'll be upfront about this. I was a bit leery of these guys selling stash tabs. It does seem scummy, which is why I spent so much time before I chipped in. But at the end of the day, you are not gated in any way, shape, or form and can buy in as much or little as you see fit, which is more than fair. All told, I highly recommend PoE to any old school Diablo fan looking for something a bit more in-depth. It's got the blood of Diablo coagulating within, and there is a bright future. The game has a sizable expansion coming soon and regular league content in the meantime. Or if you just want to create a standard character and keep building on that, that is also an option. So with that, we are at the end of the review. Hopefully it was helpful. Take care.